Today we visit with Dr. President Pastor Dick Foth. Dr. Foth is an author, storyteller, college president, church planner, mentor, and much more. He holds a master's degree from Wheaton and a doctoral degree from Gordon Conwell. This legend has influenced people within churches, colleges, the Pentagon, the Capitol, and even the White House. Today we are riding in a Toyota Highlander 4x4. The Highlander offers stability and versatility for all terrains. Dr. Foth has led through almost every kind of leadership terrain successfully. He's a leadership Highlander. On today's journey, our drive takes us into the highlands, the mountains, and we discuss the importance of mentorship. Let's slow down and catch up. Let's do some drive time. Hey, Mr. President.
How are you, sir?
Thanks for meeting me today.
My joy.
Man, I'm so looking forward to this.
Well, this is great for me. I love it.
I've got a four-wheel drive because I know you can handle all terrain, any leadership challenge, you can handle it.
I am unbelievable. If you believe that, I've got a bridge that I'd like to sell you.
Well, let's go for a ride.
Yeah, good.
It's an honor to be in Colorado with the one and only Dick Foth, President Foth, mentor extraordinaire, chaplain, pastor, leader, church planner. How many titles have you earned through the years?
Well, see, having titles and earning them are two different.
True.
I wish my mother were still alive to hear all that stuff you just said.
So, hey, tell us you have a Oklahoma connection.
I do.
How did that come to be?
My great-grandfather, Gerhardt Foth, came to Hillsboro, Kansas back in the late 1800s. He was a farm laborer, and I don't know exactly what happened. We've tried to research it, but he ended up putting his family and all his stuff in a wagon and heading south, I guess in the year 1903, in one of the last land rushes.
Yeah, before statehood.
Yeah, and so I have hanging on my wall in my study here in Colorado, I have a land grant for 160 acres for Gerhardt Foth, and signed by Teddy Roosevelt.
Signed by Teddy Roosevelt.
So each of the children of his and grandchildren got some acreage. So I think this is still true. I have 7 acres somewhere near Meeker, Oklahoma, that the land isn't necessarily, it's used, I think historically it was used for cattle, but I have the mineral rights, but I'm too far south for the oil. I think that's right.
I'm sorry about that.
Anyway.
But that means you're an honorary Oklahoman.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm all over it. Yeah.
Okay, but California was originally home for you?
Yes, right. I was born in Alameda, California, 3 months after Pearl Harbor. So I tell people I'm just finishing my 82nd trip around the sun, and in March, and my dad was an Assemblies pastor.
You're a PK.
So yeah, and so that's where I was brought up, and born in 42, and then in 45 when the war was over, a lot of folks went back or for the first time to the mission field, and my folks, I'm 3.5 years old, we go by train from California to New York City, and by the war actually ended. The Japanese surrendered in mid-August, the Germans had surrendered in mid-May, and by the end of August we were on an ocean liner heading to India, and I'm 3.5 years old.
Wow. And how long were you in India?
We were there one term.
Okay.
My mom and my sister and I had been quite sick, and so we came back. At that time, the terms were 5 years. And so my mom and my sister and I came back in the summer of 1949. We had gone out on a Swedish ocean liner with 1,600 people, and we came back on a Danish freighter that was, we had 8 passengers. 5 weeks on the open sea from what is now Sri Lanka to Boston.
Is that right?
And I tell people, you know, we played Monopoly every day. I'm 7 years old. I won one time, and I hate Monopoly. Do not talk to me about Park Place.
And where were you at in India?
We were in South India.
Okay.
And so 3 of those 4 years, I started boarding school with my sister, she's older than I, when I was 4. And so 9 months of the year away from parents, up in the tea plantations of South India.
Okay, so you come back from India back to California.
Right.
And you guys pastor again?
Yeah, what happened was we came back, and my dad came back then in 1950. We were living in Southern Cal with family, and we went for 1 year to Springfield, Missouri. And my dad worked for the Division of Foreign Missions Department at that time.
Really?
Taught half-time at CBI.
Really?
Yeah, and I lived 3 doors down. This is critical to my story, is I lived 3 doors down from a kid named John David. And we became friends, and I was older than he by 2 months, but they had skipped me a year in India, so I was ahead of him by a grade, the only time I've ever been ahead of John David. And we became good friends, and so when we left for California to go back to the church we had left in 1945, we just maintained contact, and his dad was a teacher, and he would come out and teach at camps, and we stayed in touch. Well, John David graduated high school in Springfield, Missouri. I graduated high school in Oakland. I went to Cal Berkeley. He went to Yale. I went to Wheaton College. I transferred then to Bethany College and graduated from there, but he went to University of Chicago Law School, and I went to Wheaton for grad school, so we met again there. Long story short, I went into vocational ministry, and he went into vocational politics, but still as minister. His name's John David Ashcroft. And so when we ended up in DC in '93, he had been auditor of the state of Missouri, twice attorney general, twice governor, and he came as senator in 1994 from Missouri to DC. And so when we were back in 1950, we would catch tadpoles and grow them to frogs in our mother's basement, because they had these lakes out behind CBI. They had some lakes out there,
lakes.
And
Yes.
huge tadpoles. And so that's what we did then in our 50s in Washington, D.C.
That's
We were
amazing.
catching tadpoles.
The AG, right?
Oh my.
That's incredible.
Well, what was crazy about that, and can I jump to D.C. for just a minute?
Please.
When about 2 years after, we got there in '93. In about '95, I got a call from my old boss. When I was a church planter in Illinois, my boss was a fellow named E.M. Clark. He became
I've met E.M.
He became president at North Central
Yes.
after that. But he called me and said, "Dick, my boy Vern is coming back to the Pentagon. Any chance you could go see him?" Well, Vern had joined the Navy after Evangel College, got out, and the Navy came back and recruited him. And he came to the Pentagon as a 3-star admiral. And so I started seeing him every other week, or every week when he was in town. And then they made him, he came in as what they call the J3, which is, they have categories in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they have categories, the J1, J2, J3, and one is policy and one is materiel. J3 is Director for Operations for any military thing the U.S. is involved in every day around the world, and he was that person in an office in the bowels of the Pentagon with no windows. And so I would go see him there. And then they made him director of the Joint Staff. We're talking 1,600 people, 1,400 military, 200 civilian. And then they sent him from there to be Sinclair, Commander-in-Chief, Atlantic Fleet, but apparently told him, "Don't pack your bags." And of course, the Atlantic Fleet is all Navy stuff from the Mississippi to the shores of Africa, from the North Pole to the South Pole. And then they made him head of the Navy, Chief of Naval Operations. And at that time, he became head of the Navy. In the next few months, George W. Bush came into office, and he made John his Attorney General. So from 2000 to 2004, my two closest colleagues, if you were, that I walked with were the Attorney General of the United States and the head of the United States Navy, and me. They have the creds. And when you have people who have those creds, you don't need any. It's like walking with Jesus.
That's so beautiful.
You get all of their stuff. And we're 3 Assemblies of God pastors' kids for that 4-year period. It was crazy. You couldn't write a Hollywood script to just...
But you went out to D.C. before those two.
Correct.
So you were like Abraham going out, literally you crossed the country, right?
A place I did not know.
Did not know. And yet in obedience, God gave favor to you.
That's true, and it's just, it sounds nuts to pull up and go to some place where you don't have any salary, you got no staff, you don't have an office. And I'd been a college president for 14 years at Bethany College, one of our AG colleges. And by the time, and I resigned or left when I was 50. And I was there 14 years, and the average tenure of a college president then, it's less now, was 7 years. And I tell people it takes some guys twice as long to get it. but I was shocked when I was done.
Peter Drucker says it's one of the 3 highest stressful jobs in the U.S.
Does he?
College president, yes.
If Peter was still alive, I'd send him $5.
Yeah, President of the United States, college president, and hospital administrator.
Oh,
top
boy.
3
There you
stressful
go.
jobs.
But anyway, so I'm 50 years old, and I had opportunities to go places. People were calling, and I didn't have the emotional or spiritual gas, if I can put it that way. And some folks watching or listening might get that. And I was shocked. And so we decided that we would take a 1-year self-funded sabbatical at age 50 to figure out what to do with the last half. And the only way to get self-funded was take a second mortgage on our house, which we did. And then we went to the East Coast. And for the first 6 months, I was, we were in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, south of there, and I worked with our friend Ron McManus a couple days a week, and they provided us health insurance and a couple other things. And then the next 6 months, our friend Bob Cooley, who's an icon in the Assemblies, archaeologist, and he was president at Gordon Conwell Seminary. He called and said, "Dick, we understand you guys are coming to the East Coast. Would you be minister in residence at Gordon Conwell for the spring of '93?" And I said, what does a minister in residence do? He said, "You speak 3 times in chapel, hang out with seminarians, and we give you a free apartment." I said, "I'm your guy." So anyway, and out of that experience, we were invited to DC by some other connections, and that's how we ended up there.
That's amazing. So you went from PK or MK to back to PK to college, and then out of college, what was your first ministry assignment?
Out of college, I went to grad school at Wheaton, got a master's degree in Christian education, came back and worked with my wife's father, who was a pastor in Central California, for 15 months. Wanted to go to India as a missionary, applied, and the district said, "You're good, we'll send your name on." And 2 days later, they wrote me a letter and said, "Actually, you need to be a lead pastor." I'm 24 years old. "You need to be a lead pastor for 2 years."
Sure.
And I was so frustrated, so angry by that. I almost wrote what was then the district office a letter, and somebody waved me off because they said, they keep those letters. So
people aren't waving them off anymore.
So I only wrote it in my head. And so we went and went to a couple of small churches in Northern California, and one of them met us at the back door and said, "We'd like you to be our pastor," but didn't feel it was right. The other one voted on us. And they had 13 members, and I had told the Lord, if there's any chance, make it clear, just make it clear. And they told me the vote, and it was 2 for and 11 against. And I'm saying, well, not that clear. And
That's clear.
But then I called my friend Wayne Crace, who had been pastoring in Wheaton when we were there. He later became president of Vanguard University in Southern California. And he was home missions director in Illinois. He said, "Well, we have 15 college students at the University of Illinois who would like to start an Assemblies church." I prayed about that for about a minute and said, "We'll come." And so we ended up, Ruth and I, taking our then 8-month-old daughter and driving back to Illinois from where we had been, and stayed in that district, did a church plant at the University of Illinois. And
Champaign-Urbana.
Champaign-Urbana.
My brother did his master's and actually attended that church while he was there.
Really?
Yes.
Is that right? Well,
But you planted that church.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Well, it was a small group beforehand, and then the district made it, quote, a breakthrough project in 1967, and so we ended up with 3 acres of land that the women's ministries folks had bought, and did a little building, and it started. But the first 2 or 3 years were really a challenge. It's just pulling teeth. I'd go to district meetings, you know, and because it was a student congregation, right? And I'd go to district meetings. They say, how many? The standard question back then,
of course,
was, how many did you have Sunday? You know, that was the key first question. And I would say 22, and they'd say, well, that's good. You know, they'd see me 6 months later, and it'd be closer to summertime when students would say, how many did you have Sunday? Well, 14. You know? And they'd say stuff like, God loves small things. And I just wanted to punch them out. But anyway, over time, it grew, and E.M. Clark and then Richard Dortch were my superintendents, and it was so formative for Ruth and me. You know, who wants a 24-year-old lead pastor unless you're a college kid? Yeah, and if you're an 18-year-old, a 24-year-old is pretty long in the tooth, you know?
E.M. Clark, I made the mistake of meeting him, and he gave me his book, How to Be Happy and Give All Your Money Away.
There you go. Exactly.
really changed kind of mine and my wife's life, actually.
Exactly right.
Years ago, he came and did a project for us when we were in Tulsa.
Yeah.
With my pastor, Phil Taylor. Okay, so
well, you know, could I ask you something?
Please.
Well, you know, you're in the role of young guys coming to you and talking to you and saying, and so we show up to do this home missions work. I'm wanting to go to India. I find the church plant is a mechanism to get where I really want to go. Sure. Right? So I went to him and I sat with him, and E.M. Clark had a virus that it paralyzed a vocal cord. So he kind of talked like this, and I said, Brother Clark, just want you to know, I want to be transparent up front, that probably will only stay a couple of years because we want to go to India and so forth. And he just looked at me and said, well, Brother Dick, he said, you know, my experience is that a fellow really can't do too much in less than 5 years, but whatever God's telling you, you do that. So we stayed almost 12.
12 years.
Yeah. And I visited India, but I never went as a lifer. So.
You know, you've had this anointing on your life to do some very unique and great things in the kingdom. And I'll tell you right now, part of my role I found is just encouraging people not to quit.
Yeah.
I think COVID was just the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people under duress, and
you bet.
Just the conflict and fishbowl of ministry. And but yeah, so how does a guy go and stay for 12 years? What were some of the things that kept you going there?
You know, I'm green as a gourd, and I don't know that I didn't really know what I was doing. Right. I hadn't been a pastoral ministries major. I had been what we called an exegetical theology major, so it was Bible and stuff. But the Christian ed degree really helped me, because it was, okay, this is what you deal with, the content, but Christian ed taught me that this is how you do it. This is how you think about Scripture. This is how you think about the Bible. This is how you think about your audience, right? And what was interesting is that, and it's not this way today. When I started, and perhaps even when you started, you spoke 3 times a week. You had Sunday morning, Sunday night, yes, and Wednesday night. Yes, and I thought
I'm never more than 4 days away from my next message from God.
Exactly. Yes. And 3 different things, 3 different tracks, right?
Exactly.
So you're doing a series on, if you did a series on the Gospels, and then right, and then your topical message Sunday night, and then you're doing Isaiah or something. Right. You know, and what I discovered is, folks can't remember that much. Worse than that, you can't remember that much. Right. They remember. They don't remember the title or the scriptures or anything by the time they get to the parking lot. And within a day, you don't either. That's terrible to say that. And I was whining about that to my friend Alan Groff. Tex Groff was a dear mentor to me. Back in the day, he was assistant superintendent and pastored a church in Southern Illinois, Granite City, which was a flagship church. And he was a wonderful guy. He played the piano. He was funny. He was a mystic in his own right. Practical. I define a practical mystic as somebody who's 2 inches off the floor but not off the wall. So he was.
I'm stealing that.
Please do. And one day I said, Tex, I'm preaching my head off here with all these things, and sometimes I think it just falls on the other side of the podium or the pulpit. And he grinned at me and he said, Dick, somebody studied this and figured out that we Pentecostal types, we preach the equivalent of 9, it'd be like writing 9 novels a year. And he looked at me and grinned and said, ain't nobody writes 9 good novels a year.
That's right. I look back at some of my early stuff and think, oh, those poor people.
Oh, baby. Yeah. So I think what was interesting to me is that I ended up with sort of 4 mentors in my 20s. My father-in-law, because my parents' own marriage came apart when I was getting married. So I get married at 21. Ruth is still married in the summer of '63. And I'm at Wheaton, and I get a letter from my father indicating that he's leaving my mother. And we sort of knew it was coming, but we didn't know when or how.
Had to be heartbreaking.
Yeah. But my father-in-law, Roy Blakely, stepped into that. He didn't. I brought him into that. So he became that mentor to me. And then I got to Urbana, and a year after I got there, Richard Dortch, who was then Secretary Treasurer under E.M. Clark, sent me a note and said, there's a high school football coach coming from Jerseyville to be backfield coach at the new high school in Champaign, Illinois. His name was Paul McGarvey. And in my experience, apart from my father-in-law, most of my mentors have tended to be somewhere between 15 and 20 years older than I. And Paul I'm 25 and he's 41, whatever. And he was one of those guys in a church who didn't need to be the pastor, but he loved pastors and he loved the mission and he loved the church. And I could call him at 2 a.m, go to the hospital with me, and he'd go, right? And he'd just done just done 2-a-day drills for his football team, right?
Wow.
And so he was one. And then along the way, we had an older couple. They were in their 40s, right? They walked into church one Sunday morning. He turned out to be a professor of chemistry, world famous, at the University of Illinois. And through a series of circumstances, they had decided to come and visit. And we became friends. I ended up baptizing him in Lake Michigan at his summer home. And his name was Howard Momstead. He'd written over 9 textbooks used in over 500 universities around the world. And I got 5 units of D in chemistry at Cal Berkeley when I was a freshman. And he's a specialist in spectroscopy. I didn't know that word. It's the use of light for scientific measurement. So when you used to be if you drew blood, they'd have to put it with chemicals and centrifuge and all. Now they just put it under a laser and it tells you what you got or what you don't have. And that was his whole world. And he mentored me, I think, intellectually, in saying, don't be afraid of intellectual challenges in this. You don't have to answer every question. And one day, we're driving along in the car, I said, your specialty is light, Howard, right? And he said, yeah. I said, why do you think that's the first thing God says, or is recorded? Let there be light. And he looked at me, he was very kind, didn't approach me like I had a third eye in the middle of my forehead. He just said, well, it's one of the bases for the universe, Dick. I said, well, sure, He said, E equals mc squared, Einstein's theory equals mc squared. C squared is speed of light. And he said, that's the constant. He said, without light, you don't have color. The ultimate measurement for time comes from light. The ultimate measurement for distance, the wavelength, it's light. And he said, if you don't have light, you don't have the food chain. And he just ticked these things off.
Fascinating.
And all of a sudden, I have a context for creation. So when you have physical light, that changes how you see everything. And when you have the light of the world show up, it changes everything.
That'll preach.
Yeah, feel free to use that.
Ushers.
Anyway, he was also a mentor of mine. So those 3 in particular helped me, and I'm reaching for the 4th one, but because of my age, it's not coming. I'll remember it in a few minutes.
Would you say that for longevity and leadership and serving in the kingdom, servanthood leadership, mentors are how important?
You know, we didn't call them mentors when I was that age, but now we use the language all the time. I think it's critical, especially today. In the 1990s, that was the first generation that did not have to go to an authority figure for information.
Right.
Because the internet. And now
Changed everything.
nobody's saying at the table very much, well, my teacher says, you know,
Right.
they say, I saw this on YouTube, it's got to be right, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm not being cynical in that. I'm saying if I'm a 14-year-old or a 9-year-old today, and YouTubing is the way to go for them. I mean, they're just
Right.
always on it. But you don't have any guidelines as to its validity. You don't know where it came from and all of that. So for me, and today I would suggest strongly, if there's somebody who's 15 years your senior, it doesn't have to be that number, I'm just saying, you know,
It has been for me too.
Okay.
Yeah, 15 to 20.
yeah. So if you have preschoolers and you got somebody 15 years, you got somebody who's got kids out of high school, and that they know the journey. So that mix of having somebody to bounce ideas off of, thoughts, frustrations, whatever it is. I have a friend whom I met in DC who said, you know, if early on as a younger person you choose 2 or 3 people older than you are with whom you can discuss life, they may not even be in the same place, right? But you grow to trust them, then when it comes to making decisions, they almost make themselves.
That's
because
gold.
you're talking to those 2 or 3 people.
That's gold.
Yeah, I heard him say that. I said, man, I wish I'd said that.
Yeah, right.
But I believe it to be true. And at my age now, all of those mentors are gone. They're all with Jesus. And so I keep looking for, I say to people sometimes, you know, I'll say, I have this friend, well, he's gone now. And one day in the pulpit I said, I need to find some younger friends. And a guy about 50 came up and said, well, I'd like to be one of your younger friends. So,
Well, you've become this mentor of mentors. I know even in my own journey, Gary Brugman has been a mentor to me. He married my wife Faith and I.
yeah, oh wow.
And it speaks so highly of you. And my friend Mark Batterson, Mark has told me how instrumental you were in the planting, the founding, the early years of the church. And I got to hear you speak there at National this last year and just crushed it, hitting a home run. But it seems to me that even now in the YouTube, TikTok generation, although they get their information, it's made mentorship even more valuable.
Oh yeah.
Because there's not that relational aspect online.
If you think about how human beings are made, how God designed us, when he says it is not good that man be alone, I don't think that's just a marriage statement. I think, you know, if we want to punish somebody, we make them alone.
Yeah,
we put them in solitary confinement, right? And we take away their privileges and all that kind of stuff. So, and we have several generations now of folks who are technologically connected through cyberspace, what Dr. Sherry Turkle from MIT calls alone together.
And that's what it is, yes.
They're connected in cyberspace, but they're not connected.
It's not the same.
Because when you get on social media, and I get social media, I can like parts of it, but when you get on social media thinking you'll connect, what you find out is it's one more place to compete.
Yeah.
And you have to put your best face forward. You have to always be curating your images and the photos you take and all. I mean, it's a tremendous burden for young people to carry, especially in the formative years when your brain is still connecting to the frontal lobe in those teen years. I mean, we pray for our grandkids every day on that, just on that point. Lord, help their brains, their minds be able to be shaped by something other than unseen or voices from other places.
Well, even as a young pastor, I'd come home from Sunday morning and turn on the TV and check out, watch the Dallas Cowboys lose every Sunday. But now you come home and you flip through social media and your friend John had 3,000 new converts, and
Yeah.
Jim had a $3 billion offering.
That's right. Right.
And suddenly he's like, I don't feel so good about myself,
Well,
because there's that comparison game.
Well, if you were better,
Right.
you wouldn't have that problem.
If I could measure up. So I think you need those mentors to keep you in some kind of spiritual equilibrium.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember I was this young pastor, and one of our daycare, we had a daycare center, what they called a daycare center back in the day, early childhood. She came in and sat with me, and she was a good young woman. She wasn't from our church, but she came in and she sat down and said, I'd like to talk to you. Well, when you're in your 20s, you want to be the answer to everybody's problem. She sat down and she said, I've been having dreams. I said, oh, really? Yeah. She said, like what? And she said, well, about you. And I said, what? She said, I've been feeling maybe we should connect. I'm married, got 2 kids, and she says this, and my whole life flashes before my eyes. And I'm saying, I never prayed so fast, got somebody out quicker, and I call McGarvey, my football coach.
So wise, right.
I called my football coach friend and said, McGarv, I've got to see you. He said, I'm teaching classes, Pastor, but you can come between. So I go, I'm standing in a hall, hundreds of kids going by us, and I tell them what happened. And I said, she's thinking, this dreaming, she could say that to somebody. And he started laughing. And I said, my whole life's going down the drain here. You're laughing. What are you laughing? He said, Pastor, people can say anything about you they want at any time, anywhere, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. The only thing you can do is to live a life of such integrity that when your friends hear it, they won't believe it.
It's worth the drive right there. Yes.
And
so
I
that
said,
they won't believe it.
Yeah. And I said, that's it?
Yes.
That's all you got? He's saying that's all there is.
That is all there is. Oh, this is spectacular. Wow. We don't get this in Oklahoma, my friend.
Well, you were at 5,000 feet. Now you're coming up towards 6,000 feet, toward a place called Horsetooth Reservoir, and you're looking out over the high plains.
This is amazing.